What's up, you guys? It's MB Maniac here with you, and today I'm going to be wrapping up my predictions for the Eastern Conference standings for the upcoming 2016-17 NBA season. If you missed part 2, the link to that video is in the description below. Now today I'm going to be wrapping up with the top 5 seeds in the Eastern Conference, and this one was interesting because a lot of these teams made, big moves in the offseason that really pushed them up in the standings, as we'll see, and we're just going to hop right into this one, man. Alright, so starting things off at the 5th seed, I've got the Detroit Pistons. Now, they had a really good season last year in my opinion. I don't know if a lot of us thought they would make the playoffs. They snuck into that A seed, and even though they did get swept, they showed signs that they're going to be a really big team to deal with in the future, as we're just going to hop right in and look at this roster. Now, their best player is Andre Drummond, and he is a double-double machine. As we look at his stats really fast, averaged 16 and 14 last year, and the 2 years before that, 13 and 13. And he's only 23 years old, and he's gotten locked up to that big contract. So, he's still going to continue to develop, and, he's definitely going to be an all-star this year. And the only thing that really hinders him is he is so bad at free throws that, kind of like that DeAndre Jordan situation where you just don't know if you can keep him in at the end of games. But I think his overall dominance is enough to overcome that. Running the show at point guard, they have Reggie Jackson. Now, I really like Reggie Jackson. He came over last year from Oklahoma City, and he had a pretty good season. He averaged 18 and 6, which is actually really good. He was an all-star as well. He's 26 years old, so he's just hitting the prime of his career. So you can expect an increase in numbers. And even if his production is the same as last year, that's fine because the pieces around him are so young that, they'll help him out. As we go to the next player on the roster, Contavious Caldwell-Pope. I like this kid's game. He's a pretty decent three-point shooter. He can score off the dribble. He's pretty athletic, and he's a really good defender, which is perfect for a Stan Van Gundy team. Now, the big move they made last year was trading for Tobias Harris. Only 24 years old. He's not the best three-point shooter, but he can hit it from outside every now and then. I think that he will add that to his game because he's still, again, pretty young. They have the other Morris brother in Marcus. He's also a good player. And him having that ability to shoot the three ball makes him a perfect fit to start alongside Andre Drummond, because Drummond really can't score, outside of 5 or 6 feet. So he's a good complement to him. They still have Stanley Johnson, who didn't have the best rookie season, but towards the end of the season, he played a lot better, and he does show signs that he's going to be a really good NBA player. He's still pretty young, so I think he'll come off the bench for them, but we'll see if he develops into that six-man kind of role this year. They also signed Boban Marjanovic from the Spurs, and the rest of these players, aren't really important. But the main theme of this team is that their core is so young, and they're already a playoff team, and with Drummond and Caldwell-Pope being only 23 years old, I expect them to have a big increase in production this year, which is why I have them moving up to the 5th seed. At number 4, I've got the Toronto Raptors. Now, this is a little bit of a drop-off from where they've been in the last couple of years, but I think that's more of a testament to the other teams improving. They still have DeMar DeRozan. He's a really good scorer, has a nice post-up game, likes to run, he's a pretty freak athlete. Their point guard is Kyle Lowry, who had a pretty good season last year. He was an all-star along with DeRozan, but he hasn't played really well in the playoffs, which has led a lot of people to question how good he actually is. I am rooting for him to have a better postseason this year, but even if he doesn't, you can count on him to at least give you a really good regular season. He's a pretty good three-point shooter, decent passer, he's a scrappy defender, and I actually really like his game, and I think him and DeRozan are one of the best backcourts in the league, which is why this team is so high in my rankings. They have Jonas Valanciunas at center, and at only 24 years of age, he's already showing that he could develop into a potential all-star. I mean, he's a big body, he can shoot the mid-range a little bit, and he's got really nice post moves, and again, at the age of 24, he's only going to continue to get better. They signed Jared Sullinger from the Celtics, and I think this was a smart move because it gives him a quality backup. I don't know if Sullinger is a starting quality player anymore, but he's definitely a serviceable backup. Their starting power forward is Patrick Patterson, who fits perfectly for this team because they don't have a whole lot of, three-point shooters, but he can do that, and it offsets nicely with Valanciunas and, negates the fact that DeRozan can't shoot threes. Their starting small forward is DeMar Carroll. They signed him last year to that big deal, and I actually really like his game. He's a pretty good three-point shooter, and he's really good at defense, and he just knows how to play basketball, so I think he'll have another good year for them. Terrence Ross, he had pretty good seasons when he was a little younger, but hasn't really continued to progress like a lot of us thought he would, but he'll still come in off the bench and provide some scoring for them. And these other players probably won't get much playing time, but their backcourt is the main reason I have them so high. They're both probably going to be all-stars again. And with Valanciunas continuing to progress into an all-star caliber starting center, I think this team will remain in the top 4 seeds. At the 3rd seed, we've got the Boston Celtics. Now, this is a team that had a pretty good year last year as well. They went 40-34, and they did get knocked in the first round, but Avery Bradley was hurt, and if he was healthy, I think they could have made some noise in the Eastern Conference. Their best player is Isaiah Thomas. He's coming off an all-star season, averaged 22 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists per game. His field goal percentage was a little low, but that's because he didn't really have much help on offense, as this is more of a defensive-oriented team. And he'll have a lot more help this year, as they signed Al Horford in the offseason. Now, aside from Kevin Durant signing with the Warriors, this is the biggest move that happened in the offseason, because Boston was already a really good team, and the only thing they were lacking was a dominant low post presence. And although Al Horford probably won't have many all-star seasons in him anymore, he's added that 3-ball to his game, and if you throw it to him in the post, he can get you a bucket, and he's been around the NBA for a while, so he's a nice veteran to have. Starting alongside Isaiah Thomas, they have Avery Bradley, and I really like his game, man. He can shoot the 3-ball, he can shoot the mid-range, and although his offense is kind of limited at times, where he really makes his name is on the defensive end. And when you see him go up against some of the other top point guards in the league, you see how good of a defender he is, as he causes a lot of problems for teams on the defensive end. So I expect him to have another pretty solid season. Their starting small forward is Jay Crowder, and he's pretty similar to Avery Bradley actually. Another 3-and-D wing. He's capable of hitting that mid-range jump shot, and he is really good at defense as well, and he's a little bit of a bigger small forward. When you see him play, he's pretty big, and he can keep up with some of the best small forwards in the league, which is why I think he's an important piece to have, especially on the defensive end. They still have Kelly Olynyk as well, who's a pretty nice piece to have. At the center position, he can shoot the 3-ball, and he's got a nice post game, which a lot of people don't see because he likes to shoot threes, but he's just a nice inside presence to have. And I don't know if they'll start him alongside Horford, but if they do go that route, I think that could work out really nicely for them. Coming off the bench is point guard Marcus Smart. Only 22 years of age. He's another really good defender. And while his offensive game is kind of questionable at times, I think last year he showed signs of improvement, so we'll see how he progresses throughout the season. And that's kind of going to wrap up this team. They have Gerald Green, he'll be all right for them. I don't know if he'll see that much playing time. He's 30 years old, and he's not the athlete he once was. But this team is another young team that has already improved a lot. With the addition of Al Horford, I expect him to be up there at number 3. At the 2nd seed, I've got the Indiana Pacers. Now, this one might come as a surprise to some of you, as a lot of you probably had Boston and maybe even Toronto ahead of them, but the reason I have this team so high is because of Paul George. I think in the Eastern Conference, Paul George is the only other superstar besides LeBron James. He's coming off a pretty good year, 23 points and 7 rebounds. His field goal percentage did dip a little bit, but I think now that he has some more help offensively and having a full season under his belt since coming off that gruesome injury, that we can expect him to have an even better season than last year. I think he'll average, plus 25 points a game and have at least a 45% field goal percentage. They added point guard Jeff Teague via trade, which I think is a really nice move for them, since they seem to be transitioning to a team that's going to be running and gunning a lot more, and he's a perfect point guard for that system. Although George Hill was really good for this team, I think with the new system they're going with, Jeff Teague fits it better. You know, he's a pretty decent scorer. You know, he can run, he's really fast, he knows how to get others involved, and although he probably won't have an all-star type season like he did a couple years ago, I expect him to have a pretty nice season. Their big offseason signing was Al Jefferson, who they signed to that 3-year, $30 million contract, which I think is a steal in today's NBA, because at $10 million a year, they get a guy that has been an all-star caliber center in the NBA for the last 5 years. And although he did have a drop-off last year, I think coming off the bench, you know, not having to play as much will allow him to stay healthier and really pack a punch for this team off the bench. Their starting power forward is Thaddeus Young, who's a pretty nice piece to have. You know, he averaged 15 and 9 last year. You know, at 28 years old, he's in the prime of his career, so I expect him to have the same kind of season this year, you know, probably average around a double-double. Now, the main reason I have this team moving up so high in the rankings is Miles Turner. Now, he actually wasn't getting much playing time at the beginning of the season, but when he did get that increase in minutes, I think everyone saw, you know, that this kid could develop into an all-star potential player. And with the big increase in minutes this year and the new system they have in place where he'll probably be starting at center, I think he's just going to thrive in this system. You know, he can shoot a little bit. He's really good at the mid-range game, and he is a beast on the inside, especially for someone so young. So I expect him to have a really good campaign, and he's probably my front runner for most improved player, actually. They still have Monte Ellis, who's a decent player still. He had a pretty big decrease in production last year, you know, and I think that's due to him getting older, as well as all these other younger players on this team, you know, kind of stepping up and filling more of a role. So he might even decline a little bit more in production, but I still think he's a nice player to have, and he'll probably still start for them. They still have CJ Miles, who's a pretty decent player still, you know, and coming off the bench for them this year, he's kind of going to have to fill that 6-man role, and I think that's good for him. You know, he's a pretty good shooter. You know, he can create his own shot, and you know, with limited minutes, you know, he won't have that much pressure on him to score, so I expect him to have a pretty good campaign. But, you know, the main reason I see this team jumping so high in the standings is because, number one, I think Paul George is a superstar, and that he's really going to show us this year, you know, how good he can actually be. I expect him to have an MVP type season. And Miles Turner, you know, I think he's just going to develop a lot this year. You know, he's my front runner for most improved player, and all those things together alongside with Al Jefferson signing, I just think this team is number 2 in the East, man. So wrapping things up, sitting atop the Eastern Conference standings, I've got the NBA champion Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, this one shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, as this team has dominated the Eastern Conference for the last couple of years, and we all know why as we start looking at the roster. Their best player is undoubtedly LeBron James, and while I'm not a big fan of him personally, you gotta respect what he does, man. The performance he gave in the NBA Finals last year was nothing short of legendary. You know, coming down from a 3-1 deficit to beat a 73-9 team is something that we probably won't see for a long time. Now, at age 31, he did show a little bit of signs of aging last year. You know, it took him a little bit to get into the groove of things in the regular season, but I don't think that really matters because, you know, he knows now that it's all about the postseason, and he can kind of just cakewalk his way through the regular season anyway because this team has so much talent around him. As we look at the rest of the roster, you know, their point guard is Kyrie Irving, and this dude is just flat out nasty, man. He's got some nasty handles. He's a really good three-point shooter. You know, his pick and roll game is really hard to defend because he just seems to get anywhere he wants on the floor, and he put on a spectacular NBA Finals as well. And at age 24, I think that with LeBron, you know, starting to get a little older and probably resting a little more, Kyrie's going to have to take over the offense a lot more. So I expect him to actually have a better season than last year. You know, he's not even in the prime of his career. They still have Kevin Love, who's obviously seen a drop in production the last couple of years, but I actually think he's still a really good player. You know, he's a really good post-up scorer. You know, he's good at rebounding, and he's pretty good at shooting threes, especially for a 4-man. I just don't think this system fits him, which is why I think he'll get traded, and I really hope he does because I think on another team he could still go back to being a 20-10 kind of guy. They locked up Tristan Thompson, which I think was smart for them because he's a really good center, and he's only 25 years old, so you know, he might even develop a little bit more, and he just plays with a lot of heart and passion. You know, he gets a lot of rebounds, and you know, when you have Kyrie Irving and LeBron James, you don't really need to have that much of an offensive game, so he fits perfectly with them in the starting lineup. They finally re-signed J.R. Smith after a lot of contract disputes, which I think was smart for them because he did just help him win an NBA championship, and even at age 31, you know, he's just a good quality starting guard. You know, he kind of turned his stuff around in Cleveland. He was kind of known as a knucklehead before that, but you know, I guess coming to Cleveland and playing with one of the greatest players all time, you know, kind of made him look in the mirror and take himself more seriously, and I expect him to have another pretty good season for them. Coming off the bench for them is Iman Shumpert, who I still like. You know, he's a decent shooter, and what he really brings is a lot of defensive energy and passion, which is always good to have off the bench. They still have Channing Frye, who's a pretty good player to have on the bench. You know, all he has to do is kind of come in and give Tristan Thompson a break, shoot some threes, and he actually played pretty well for them last year, so I expect him to have another decent season. And that's going to wrap it up for this team. You know, they still have Richard Jefferson and Mike Dunleavy, who are quality small forwards coming in off the bench for them, but the main reason this team will continue to dominate the Eastern Conference is because of LeBron James and Kyrie Irving. They just have an overwhelming amount of talent compared to the other teams in the Eastern Conference, which is why I see them just kind of cakewalking their way to the finals yet again. Alright guys, so that's going to wrap up my Eastern Conference standings predictions, and man, we are just a couple of days away from opening night. I don't know about you, but I am so ready for the season to start. You know, I'm really interested to see if these predictions pan out like I expect, and I will be making one more video with my season award predictions, and I'll get that out hopefully within the next couple of days. As always guys, any questions, comments, feedback you have for me, let me know in the comment section below, and signing off as always, MB Maniac out.